Et puis, eh bien, nous allons basculer vers un autre monde et plutôt, voilà, un peu faire un petit bond dans le temps pour nous retrouver là au XVIIIe siècle et puis pour changer un petit peu d'horizon géographique aussi, avec la présentation de Johanna Ilmakunnas, donc qui est professeure d'histoire nordique à l'Académie d'Åbo, l'Université et Académie d'Åbo. Et donc, Johanna, tu travailles beaucoup sur la culture matérielle, la consommation au XVIIIe siècle, notamment dans le monde des élites suédoises ou en Finlande. Et tu as beaucoup travaillé justement sur ces liens entre consommation, famille, le genre au XVIIIe siècle. Et parmi ton actualité brûlante, parce tu as quand même réalisé un certain nombre de travaux et d'ouvrages, l'on peut citer par exemple l'ouvrage coédité avec John Stobart, A Test for Luxury in Early Modern Europe, cet ouvrage, ou également l'ouvrage qui traite plus du genre Early Professional Woman in Northern Europe également. Et ton dernier article, qui est tout chapitre d'ouvrage, qui est tout récent puisqu'il a été publié chez Bloomsbury en 2022 et qui est aussi lié aux travaux sous la direction de John Stobart également, donc dans l'ouvrage Daily Lives and Daily Routines in 18th-century Europe, et donc qui s'intitule, cet article, Life Stage, Work and Daily Routines of the 18th-century Swedish Elite, Johan Gabriel Oxenstiernas Diaries, donc voilà, dernier ouvrage qui justement est intéressant, ce qui permet justement de travailler aussi sur ces sources extrêmement intéressantes. Alors, donc nous voici cette fois-ci transportés à la cour de Suède au XVIIIe siècle, avec quand même un petit lien avec la France, puisque tu vas évoquer, alors je perds voilà, aussi le lien avec la famille Fersen, qu'on connaît un petit peu, voilà, par Marie-Antoinette, par exemple. Voilà, eh bien, voilà, c'est à ton tour. Donc, je coupe mon micro et je te laisse activer donc le partage d'écran pour une présentation. Merci beaucoup.
Merci Aurélie. Merci de m'inviter ici. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui. Moi, je vais parler en anglais, mais on peut continuer à discuter après en français ou en anglais, comme vous voulez. My topic is today appearance, sociability, and building up a career at court in 18th century Sweden. And this is a lot about how through outer appearance, how through social skills, how through material culture, a family could establish a career at court in 18th century Sweden. But before I start, I thought just a short contextualizing of background, so that I had already forgot that Fersen is, of course, probably a well-known name for everybody. Here I'm talking about another branch of the family, the uncle of the famous Fersen, but I have written on him also a lot. But in 18th century Sweden, the country went through a number of quite significant political shifts that had a huge impact on how the court culture was shaped, because the 17th century Swedish court functioned very much according to German and Austrian examples. But in the 18th century, it was France Sweden was looking to and applying the court culture from. But it's important to understand that Sweden, that was a great European power in the 17th century, after the treaty in Neustadt in 1721, Sweden lost its power position in Europe, which nobody knew at that time, obviously. And France became really, or continued to be really important ally. From 1721, Sweden went to a new political culture, which was from absolutism to the age of liberty, as it was called by the contemporaries. But the age of liberty, it meant the liberty of the diet, the liberty of aristocracy as a power actor. Swedish royals were actually from very much from German states, princes in little German states. And the most important shift, perhaps in this cultural sense, was when King Adolf Frederick of Holstein-Gottorp became crown prince in Sweden, and when he married Lovisa Ulrika, who was the sister of Friedrich II of Prussia. So in this way, the connections to Prussia and especially to France became extremely important, very much because of Lovisa Ulrika and her ambitions, both culturally and politically. The next important shift was in 1771 when Gustav III succeeded. He was actually at the opera in Paris when he heard that his father had passed away. Gustav III was first in Sweden born king after 100 years or something like that. So it was really important politically. And in 1772, the king made a revolution, called a revolution, re-establishing absolutism in Sweden. So these political structures are actually extremely important when we consider court culture and court life in 18th century Sweden, as we will see here. And I'm going to talk about one family, 2 generations, and how in this family a very successful career of first the husband, then the wife, and also 5 daughters took place. The family in focus is the Fersen family, Count Carl von Fersen and his spouse Baroness Charlotte Spyre, and their 5 daughters. They had actually 6 daughters, but one of the daughters died in infancy. No sons. And the famous Axel von Fersen is the son of the brother of Carl von Fersen. And I'm going to look at how this family created through the career at court, through their material knowledge, material literacy, as for instance Serena Dyer and Chloe Wixton Smith, among others, have developed recently, and also how shopping practices and self-fashioning through different objects in this family helped consolidating their career at court. Important to understand is that this, as in so many other aristocratic families in Sweden, perhaps also across Europe, had multinational, if we can talk about national background at this time, coming actually from Baltic states in the early 17th century, when the Baltic, today's Baltic states were part of Sweden, but also from the end of the 17th century, quite important connections to France also, both in Fersen family and also in the family of Spyre. And here it's perhaps important to notice that I'm talking about Charlotte Spyre, because in 18th century Sweden, noble women kept their own name, own surname when they married, which is for historians something quite fantastic, because it makes it much easier to trace who was who. But obviously, Charlotte Spyre is also Countess von Fersen in sources, so you have to be aware about who the sources are actually referring to. Carl von Fersen, he spent several years on continent. He studied in Holland, and he made quite modest career of an officer in French service in the 1730s, while his younger brother Axel von Fersen, the father of the infamous Fersen, he made a fabulous career, which in turn then in the next generation helped his own son on his career. But Charlotte Spyre herself, she also spent several years in France in her youth, and if Fersen and Spyre, if they didn't meet already in Stockholm before traveling to France, they definitely met in Paris. Because Charlotte Spyre spent time in Paris from 1739 to 1741, when his uncle by marriage, Count Carl Gustav Tessin, was the Swedish envoy in Paris. And through Tessin and her wife Ulla Spyre, Charlotte Spyre had access to not only the court but also to aristocratic salons in Paris and cultural circles. Because Tessin, he was extremely interested in contemporary arts, and perhaps you know that he acted as a commissioner both on behalf of Lovisa Ulrika and Adolf Fredrik in acquiring contemporary art to royal Swedish collections, and also in his own collections, but he had then later to sell them to the state because of his lousy finances. But Charlotte Spyre was a famous beauty in Paris, and it was really fascinating to hear also the presentation of Flavia Leroux, because of this importance of beauty of these young women, and how it was kind of cultural capital also. Beauty, but I think that there has to be often also more intelligence, personal skills, because at least in these 18th century Swedish sources, especially the memoirs and diaries are very nasty. Often they really write about quite young women about that. Well, now they have lost their beauty and etc. So I think there has to be, for creating such a career, for instance, that Charlotte Spyre created, there has to be also something else. And at Swedish court, the cultural capital was extremely important. So sociability, the ability to dress up, to perform in plays, in masquerades, and in these joys of daily life at court. And in this, both Carl von Fersen and Charlotte Spyre seem to excel, as did their 5 daughters, who were born quite rapidly after the marriage of the couple. But before I go to the second generation, I want to talk about Charlotte Spyre, who was depicted in while in Paris by Nonot as a Vestal, and then a couple of years later by Antoine Vienne, the court painter of Prussian court in Berlin. Art historian Carolina Brown has talked about the different roles of aristocratic women in portraits, and a number of roles, as we see here. In the one hand side, as a virtuous, often learned Vestal in these antiquities, role model, but also then on the other hand side in masquerade dress as La Folie, which is a quite direct hint to this apparent importance of Charlotte Spyre in marriage market in Sweden. The frame of the portrait, you can see that there are several roosters or cocks who were said to depict her the men who were courting her. And it's quite interesting that Carl von Fersen actually he courted her in this court milieu for 4 years before she said yes. And I think it's quite important, because otherwise in what I've been researching or studying, the marriages were decided much faster than in this case. And it's also quite interesting that apparently, especially Carl von Fersen was really in love with Charlotte Spyre, and they married in 1748. But we know that at least from 1744, Fersen was courting Spyre, who was also depicted by Gustav Ljungberg, who was a really famous pastel painter in 17th century Sweden, and before that again in Paris, where he was studying, for instance, with Rosalba Carrera, the pastel painting. But here again, a different role for Charlotte Spyre in negligee, and as a part of the larger portrait gallery of beauties that Carl Gustaf Tessin commissioned from Ljungberg, where there were same age of maids of honor at Swedish court who were painted by Ljungberg in this vivid colored pastel colors, all in negligee. But this is before the marriage. These portraits and this quite ostentatious display of the beauty of Charlotta Spyre. Because when the couple married, it's quite clear that the first years Charlotta Spyre did participate in court life, but not that much, because she was constantly pregnant and giving birth to the daughters. So the building up a career started with Carl von Fersen, who is here depicted by again by Gustav Ljungberg, while he already was in the height of his career as first as a chamberlain, then as master of the hunt and director of the Royal Opera. I've looked at a huge material of account books and ledgers, receipted bills, so very similar material that we heard before also. And according to the account books, it's astonishing how much Fersen is investing his court career especially through different kind of accessories related to his office as master of the hunt. And this is very visible in the form of the expenses in horses, in saddles, and in this kind of horse-related accessories. And also, it's quite interesting that according to the account books, the couple is acting as a pair, very much as a pair, and they are acquiring a fashionable decoration for their house. They are acquiring of jewelry, of clothes, and this kind of fashion items. And something which I think it's extremely interesting also to see is not to look at the consumption of a woman or consumption of a man, but the consumption of the couple and the family, and how this consumption can be used as a means for creating this career, because it's so obvious that it is through outer appearance to the personal capacities and social capital. Carl von Fersen, he was extremely talented singer, and apparently he was also quite talented in organizing these events at court. And he was extremely wealthy, because it's also quite clear that that for a career at court, it was important to invest your own wealth. The courtiers in Sweden, they did have an income, they did have a salary from court, but it was more important, I agree, for the women than for men, because the female courtiers' salaries were high, whereas the male courtiers' salaries weren't so high compared to for instance, offices in administration or in army. Here we see Carl von as a courtier and as a soldier, as an officer. Merit Laine, who has research on 18th century Swedish portraits, argues that this very blue color of coats were always associated to Sweden as a country, and to Swedish army, and to the virtues of aristocratic officers. And under the coat, Fersen has a armory, and the decoration he bears its Svärdorden, which was given only for officers. And then, of course, he has also this panther fur or skin, which is can be linked on one hand side on his office as master of the hunt, but also it's a sign of virility at this time. So building up the career, I argue, went through this outer appearance, which was also communicated very much through portraits. While Carl von Fersen had already consolidated his career, and he achieved also the post of chief master of the hunt, together with the directorship of the royal operas, and at the same time, while their daughters were small, also Charlotta Spyre started a career at court. She had been a maid of honor, something which almost every aristocratic woman in Sweden was, because it was also a sign of benevolence by the royals for the families of the girls. But in this case, also not only for the family of the Charlotte Spyre, but also for Carl Gustav Tessin, who was a great favorite of Lovisa Ulrika as crown princess, and then also as queen, because Tessin, he had and he also maintained his contacts to France, and through these contacts also a lot of luxury items were shipped to Sweden. Charlotte Spyre became lady of the palace, mistress of the robes, and she made almost 20-year career at court all the time. And at the same time, also the next generation, the 5 daughters of the couple, entered at court in the beginning of the 1770s, or at the late 1760s, when they were quite young. Here, one of the daughters, perhaps the most famous ones. And here I have to say that again, as we heard previously, the memoirs are an important source, but in Swedish case, they perhaps depict a bit more these personalities, because they quite often paint a written portrait of key figures at court. So also of especially of the 2 eldest daughters, Charlotte Spyre and Carl von Fersen. The daughters were married quite rapidly in the beginning of the 1770s, and it is very clear that that the family invested a lot on the trousseau, the service, the toilette, and also the lingerie. I don't know what it is in English. And here in the picture, it's service the toilette. Queen Sophia Magdalena, the Queen consort of Gustav III. Obviously, this is royal, and this is more ostentatious and luxurious than the toilet services for the Fersen daughters. But the receipted bills and the account books tell that very similar objects were acquired, but they were in silver. Mirrors, candlesticks, different kind of small boxes, etc. Very much in the style of what you see in this detail image of François Boucher's the milliner, which was already at that time in the Swedish royal collections, commissioned by Lovisa Ulrika. So also through these objects and through the knowledge of using them in daily life, the Fersen family, I would argue, also consolidated their position at court. Mimi Hellman has in a fascinating article written about work of leisure, with which she means this knowledge and ability to use different accessories to be dressed and to move in dresses and to move between and with furniture, for instance, as needing so much effort that it became work for the aristocracy. And I think this is a really fascinating thought. Here you see left is the oldest of the sisters, Ulrika Eleonora, and on the right, Augusta von Fersen. And now we have already entered to the era of Gustav III, who was extremely skillful in using this, what we now would call soft power. So using power and using his political power through, for instance, theater, opera, cultural life, etc. And this is very interesting and important when we consider outer appearance in 18th century Sweden and at court, because Gustav III, he took as a ideal build the court of Louis XIV, and he invented new court etiquette in Sweden. This was very much because he was extremely interested in this, but also because he was extremely skillful in using etiquette and using court life as a means to diminish the power of aristocracy, the political power of aristocracy. And here the Fersen family is extremely interesting, because Carl von Fersen and Charlotte Spyre, they were more interested in cultural life, and the court life, while Axel von Fersen was one of the most important politicians and really in opposition to the king in 18th century Sweden. So Gustav III used his ability to create new court etiquette, etc., for diminishing the power of aristocracy. And in this, both of the ladies in waiting, the sisters here, were extremely important. And Gustav III actually is quite topical today if we think how a sovereign or a monarch used history in creating his own narrative of the national past. And in that, something which is a really key is Swedish national dress, which we also see here, but even more in this painting. Because Gustav III created and took in use and introduced in 1778 a national dress in Sweden. This was a long-term project, and obviously not only a Swedish project, because there were across Europe similar ambitions. For instance, because of the idea of that French luxury and fashion dresses were too expensive, and because of mercantile economic politics in many countries, it was regarded negative that, for instance, aristocracy and high nobility were using French clothes and French dresses and French silks and tissues, etc. Gustav III had the idea that this national dress would have been really national across the society, and there were also huge projects on creating this, and also huge projects on propagating the pros, often sometimes also cons of the dress. Historian Mikael Alm has quite recently published in English a very fine study on national dress. But if we take a look at the court and national dress, there it is again this kind of use of power. For Gustav III, he was himself very fascinated about the dress, but the courtiers weren't. And here you can see the king himself. He's sitting on the sofa on left under the mirror, and the elderly lady who is doing needlework in the center, she's Charlotta Spyre, and this is something we know. And the lady who has the dress in silver and gold, she is Duchess Charlotta, who later became queen. And probably some of the ladies on right there are some of the daughters of Charlotte Spyre and Carl von Fersen, perhaps also their cousins, because one of the cousins was the mistress of the robes of the Duchess. But here you can see that the courtiers are using the national dress. This is the national Swedish dress for everyday use at court, and it was created and designed by the king himself, who regarded himself as the third Gustav on the throne of Sweden. The Gustav I was reigning in 16th century, and you can see that very clearly that the cut of the dress is inspired by the Renaissance ideals. And something which is quite interesting is that at the museum collections and also in private collections, there are more male dresses preserved than female dresses, which is usually it's other way around, at least here in Nordic countries. But here you see the dress, which is very, very different from the fashionable French dress that the aristocrats and higher echelons of the society usually used. And I would argue that this dress was again extremely important for power use for the king, because, for instance, when Gustav III did a large tour in Europe, he traveled to Italy and to France. He made his courtiers to dress in this national dress, and you can read in diaries, for instance, that as soon as they just could in Rome, for instance, the courtiers, they went and changed to normal clothes, the French dress. And I think that it's really interesting also if you take a look at the cut of the dress. The coat is extremely short if you compare to the French coats, and this is something that also the men were noting, that they felt a bit uncomfortable with this very tight sitting and short coat. Of course, also the frack was quite tight sitting, but it wasn't short, and it wasn't showing your backside at the same way than this court dress. So I think it's quite fascinating how really the king used power through both cultural power and political power through this national dress, because it's also very very interesting that that after his revolution in 1772, the old aristocracy, in which the Fersen family and Spyre, for instance, belonged to, and who was for strong power for the diet and for the nobility, and the kind of newly ennobled families who were loyal to the king. And these newly ennobled men who also got different offices and positions at court, in army, in administration, they let portray themselves very often in national dress, something which the old aristocracy did never. And these two images of dancing sisters from Fersen, they aren't commissioned by themselves, but by the king, and they are performing in a play that was about the greatness of Gustav II. But the aristocracy, they still wanted to depict and portray themselves in these fashion dresses according to French model. So to conclude, the outer appearance, but also how you use outer appearance, how you this performative aspect of outer appearance of clothes and of the importance of both outer appearances and of skills and knowledge and cultural capital in simple way was extremely important in creating a career at court. It was very possible to start as a maid of honor or as a chamberlain, but to continue on the career, it was important also to be able to invest both cultural and economic capital through outer appearance, through performances at court. And here, before stopping, just to show also the vividness of the colors of Carl von Fersen's portrait, later portrait. Here we have not anymore the young virile officer, but for here we have a established courtier in almost cardinal red. Thank you for listening.
Merci beaucoup, Johanna, pour cette présentation extrêmement intéressante. Et donc, s'il y a des questions, n'hésitez pas, c'est le moment.
Comme j'ai déjà dit, on peut continuer en français aussi.
Voilà,
ou en anglais.
Comme tu veux, comme vous voulez, voilà, en fonction des compétences de chacun et de chacune. C'est gentil de t'adapter en tous les cas. Merci. Vous avez des questions? Voilà.
Pas de questions.
Voilà. Alors, bon, bah, je n'ose me lancer parce qu'à chaque fois, il y a quelqu'un, mais c'est pas grave, c'est très bien. Bon, alors, je vais me lancer. Voilà. Alors, merci beaucoup pour cette présentation. Tu parles beaucoup d'investissement, justement, dans le capital culturel et économique. Et sur les aspects économiques, je voulais avoir un peu une idée de cet investissement financier, parce que tu as parlé aussi de livres de comptes. Et est-ce que c'est un investissement qui est lourd? Est-ce que, alors pour le cas de cette famille qui visiblement a de l'argent, est-ce qu'ils ont du mal à payer ou est-ce qu'on rencontre un peu ce genre de pratique? Quel investissement finalement financier cela représente?
Oui, merci, c'est une très bonne et très importante question. Ça dépend aussi un peu, bien sûr. Mais ici, il me semble que la famille de Fersen est, dans le contexte de la Suède, extrêmement riche. Dans le contexte français, c'est plutôt assez modeste. Mais c'est aussi, et ça c'est quelque chose que j'ai oublié de dire, c'est aussi un investissement sur plusieurs plans, sur les vêtements, sur les trousseaux des filles par exemple, et sur aussi sur tous les divertissements à la cour, parce que c'est pas toujours, mais c'est souvent que les courtières eux-mêmes qui payent des divertissements, quelque chose qui s'appelle carrousel au temps de Gustav III, parce qu'il est extrêmement fasciné par Henri IV de France, par exemple. Alors il y a des énormes spectacles, et c'est pas rare que c'est par exemple Carl von Fersen en tant que directeur de l'opéra qui va payer beaucoup. Et bien sûr, tous les qu'est-ce que j'ai maintenant, dress de mascarade qu'on paye, que les aristocrates payent eux-mêmes. Mais aussi, il faut payer pour avancement sur les d'office sur l'autre. Alors, comme en France, on achète les offices, oui. Tu es...
Les charges, oui, les
oui,
offices, les charges.
Oui,
Voilà,
oui,
oui,
voilà,
tout
oui.
à fait, ouais.
Il y a aussi, on peut trouver ici, cette famille, il me semble, ils se sentent bien à la cour, mais il y a aussi les familles ou les particuliers qui écrivent qu'il faut qu'ils sont à la cour, mais ils ne veulent pas parce que il y a aussi des aristocrates qui sont tellement pauvres qu'il faut qu'ils soient en charge pour avoir un peu d'argent. Et alors, il faut qu'ils soient à la cour, même qu'ils ne veulent pas. Alors ça, c'est quelque chose que je trouve tellement fascinant aussi parce qu'il y a cet aspect individuel.
Merci beaucoup. Et cet investissement, est-ce qu'il est rentable? Est-ce que ça vaut le coup est-ce qu'il y a des revenus associés aux charges? Est-ce qu'on investit, on a en pouvoir symbolique, culturel, etc.,
Oui,
mais financier,
oui.
voilà, est-ce que... Voilà.
Oui, mais pas autant. Et ça dépend. Alors, dans le cas de Fersen, parce qu'ils sont aussi... alors, ils sont tellement riches que pour eux, c'est pas pareil. Mais il me semble que surtout pour les femmes, ça leur donne possibilité pour un revenu qu'on peut utiliser comme on veut. Et ça, c'est aussi assez intéressant, je trouve.
Merci. Flavie, je crois que tu as...
Oui, et pour continuer du coup sur cet échange, merci d'ailleurs pour cette présentation passionnante. Et vous avez des sources que nous n'avons plus la chance d'avoir en France, des sources directes que sont notamment les vêtements, ça c'est vraiment sublime. Oui. Sur la question des revenus, je voulais juste approfondir un peu. Est-ce que vous savez d'où d'où ces familles tirent leurs revenus? Est-ce que ça vient de la terre? Est-ce qu'ils dépendent beaucoup de la faveur du roi? Est-ce qu'on est dans un contexte finalement qui ressemble un peu à celui de la France ou alors pas du tout? Vous disiez que c'est une famille très riche, du coup, est-ce qu'on sait d'où vient cette richesse?
Ah oui, c'est de la terre, c'était des investissements sur les manufactures et c'est aussi et surtout est-ce que c'est forge en français? Oui, oui, parce que toujours dans cette époque-là, la Suède exporte
Le commerce.
Oui, exporte de iron.
Du fer?
Oui, du fer, et surtout en Angleterre.
D'accord.
C'est de là. Oui.
C'est intéressant parce que c'est vrai que c'est très différent du contexte français où on a ce qu'on appelle la dérogeance qui, en principe, ne permet pas à la noblesse de travailler, donc de faire commerce, même si on sait que de fait,
oui, mais c'est pareil.
Évidemment, hein, ils le font quand même, mais
oui.
c'est intéressant de voir que justement, ils n'ont pas ces problèmes d'endettement systématique. On associe généralement aux familles nobles françaises.
Ah oui, mais c'est pareil en Suède, et aussi les privilèges de la noblesse disent qu'on ne travaille pas.
D'accord. Oui.
Mais aussi que c'est le privilège de la noblesse de faire commerce en gros.
D'accord.
Mais si je ne me trompe pas, c'est un peu pareil en France. La pratique, c'est une autre chose, et le principe, c'est quelque chose d'autre.
Oui, tout à fait, bien sûr. Oui, on voit bien en France, et surtout pour Aurélie va me corriger si je me trompe, mais j'ai l'impression qu'au 18e, c'est entre guillemets encore plus visible que ça ne l'était auparavant. Mais effectivement, on le voit très bien. Et d'ailleurs, enfin, pour ce que je connais moi, c'est-à-dire les maîtresses, rien qu'à leur échelle, on le voit. Hein, et avec Madame de Pompadour, par exemple, c'est même frappant. Enfin, je veux dire, on est face à des personnes qui investissent énormément d'argent dans ce qui fonctionne à l'époque. Alors, ce n'est pas forcément le commerce, bien que dans son cas, ce soit le cas, notamment le commerce transatlantique. Mais on a aussi les fermes. Enfin, il y a tout un tas de domaines où normalement, la noblesse, comme le roi d'ailleurs, ne sont pas censés investir, et le font délibérément quand même.
Oui.
Mais merci en tout cas, très intéressant.
Il nous reste encore quelques minutes pour des questions. Moi, j'en ai une. J'en profite. Sur le trousseau, justement, qui est un peu aussi le moment du mariage extrêmement important sur le plan social, sur le plan aussi économique, hein, par la force des choses. Donc, on avait le service de toilette qui est absolument magnifique, mais c'est celui de la reine. Voilà. Oui. Et est-ce que là aussi, on a des objets, comme on a vu tout à l'heure, qui se transmettent de mère en fille ou sur plusieurs générations? On voit ce genre de choses à l'occasion justement des mariages et ensuite des transmissions, un patrimoine à la fois matériel mais aussi symbolique aussi. Est-ce qu'on a un exemple dans cette famille, effectivement, à ces occasions?
Ah oui, il y a des bijoux et il y a les draps de lit qui je trouve fascinant, que je pense que c'est justement Axel von Fersen qui écrit, je pense après la Révolution, quand son père meurt, qu'il y a des draps de lit qui datent du XVIIe siècle.
Ils sont pas usés, ils sont encore utilisés.
Peut-être tellement bonne qualité.
Oui, on l'utilise rarement peut-être aussi, juste, voilà, ça fait partie. Voilà.
Oui, mais c'est un peu pareil comme avec les maîtresses de cette famille, parce qu'il n'y a pas autant qui restent pour nous, parce que la famille était très étroite au 19e siècle, parce que Axel von Fersen ne s'est jamais marié, et parce que Karl von Fersen et Charlotte Spyre n'avaient que des filles. Alors tout, je pense que c'était aussi une fille qui a tout fait aller au casino de Monaco, je ne sais pas où, au 19e siècle. Et puis, elle est morte dans un incendie. c'était un peu tragique, oui. Mais alors, il n'y a pas autant qui reste.
Voilà. D'accord, merci. La toute dernière, non? Personne là? Dernière minute?
Une petite question pour la fin.
Voilà. Avant de remercier nos intervenantes. Non.
Non, bah écoutez, merci à nos deux intervenantes. Merci pour leur présentation.